Welcome, dear listeners, to a tale that will chill your bones and captivate your imagination. I'm Mooncat, your guide through the snowy, shadowed mountains of Japan, where ancient legends come to life. Tonight we journey into the heart of a story as cold and haunting as the winter wind itself. Hiroshi, a traveller whose fateful encounter with the ethereal Yuki-onna, a woman of otherworldly beauty and deadly intent, will lead him into a world where promises are eternal, and the line between life and death is blurred by the falling snow. As we unravel the mysteries of Yuki-onna's tragic past and Hiroshi's desperate attempt to escape her icy grasp, you'll find yourself caught in a web of suspense, beauty and terror. If you're ready to step into this chilling tale, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that takes you to the edge of the unknown. Now let's begin our journey. If you dare. Hiroshi had always been drawn to the mountains. Their towering peaks and snow-covered slopes seemed to promise adventure and solitude, an escape from the bustling city life that had become too stifling. He had heard the stories, of course, whispers of spirits and lost souls that haunted these remote places. But like most modern men, he dismissed them as mere folklore, the kind of tales old women told to frighten children. It was late afternoon when Hiroshi set out from the village, intending to reach the summit before nightfall. The path was familiar, one he had taken many times before, but today the air was different, thicker, more oppressive. The snow, which had been light and powdery earlier, began to fall in heavy, wet clumps, and the wind picked up, howling through the trees like a beast on the hunt. Despite the worsening conditions, Hiroshi pressed on, determined to reach his goal. But as the light began to fade, he found himself losing his way. The path that had been obscured by drifts of snow, and the familiar landmarks had vanished, swallowed by the storm. Panic set in as he realized he was lost, but there was no turning back. He had to find shelter or risk freezing to death in the blizzard. Just as despair began to take hold, he saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees. With renewed hope, Hiroshi trudged toward the glow, stumbling over roots and rocks hidden beneath the snow. The light hemmed to a small, decrepit hut, half buried in snow. It looked ancient, as though it had stood there for centuries, weathering countless storms. The door creaked open as he approached. He stepped inside, eager to escape the biting cold. The interior was simple: a low table, a fire pit with glowing embers, and a futon covered in white fur. A single candle on the table casting flickering shadows on the walls. But what caught Hiroshi's attention was the woman standing in the corner, her presence so still and silent that he hadn't noticed her at first. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, with skin as pale as the snow outside and hair as dark as the night sky. Her eyes, though mesmerizing, held a depth of sadness that seemed to pierce through him. She wore a white kimono, its fabric shimmering like frost in the dim light. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft and melodic, but tinged with an unsettling coldness. "You must be weary from your journey." Hiroshi nodded, too exhausted to speak. The woman gestured to the fire pit, and he sank down beside it, holding his hands out to the warmth. As he thawed, his mind began to clear, and he realized with a start who this woman must be, the Yuki-onna. He had heard of her in the stories, how she was said to be the spirit of a woman who had died in the snow, forever cursed to roam the mountains, luring travelers to their doom. This Yuki-onna was different from what he had imagined. She seemed almost human. As if sensing his thoughts, the Yuki-onna began to speak, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Once, long ago, I was a woman like any other. My name was Asami, and I lived in a village not far from here. I was known for my beauty, and many men sought my hand in marriage, but my heart belonged to a man named Kenji. We were to be married in the spring, and I thought my life would be filled with happiness." She paused, her eyes distant, as if she was seeing those days long past. But that winter was harsh, colder than any I had known. One day Kenji and I were caught in a terrible storm, much like the one outside now. We were separated, and I was lost in the mountains, wandering for days trying to find my way back. But the cold was relentless, and eventually I succumbed to it. Her voice grew softer, tinged with sorrow. When I awoke, I was no longer the woman I had been. I was something else, something cold, unforgiving. I searched for Kenji, but he was gone, and my village had forgotten me. The mountains became my home, and I became the Yuki-onna, cursed to wander these frozen lands, unable to rest. Hiroshi listened, his heart heavy with the weight of her tale. He could see the pain in her eyes, the longing for a life she could never return to. But there was something else there, too, something darker, more sinister. "I have seen many travelers like you," she continued, her gaze locking onto his. "Men who lost their way, drawn to my light in the storm. They all thought they could resist the cold, that they could survive. But the cold is patient, Hiroshi. It waits, and it takes what it wants." Hiroshi felt a chill run down his spine. The warmth of the fire suddenly seemed insufficient, as if it were being sucked away by the presence of the Yuki-onna. He knew he had to escape, but how could he outwit a spirit that had centuries of experience luring men to their deaths? Desperation fueled his thoughts, and an idea began to form. He would have to be cunning to use her own nature against her. "I understand your pain," Hiroshi said, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "But perhaps you can find peace. Perhaps I can help you." The Yuki-onna tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her icy eyes. And how would you do that? Hiroshi took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. You said you were separated from Kenji in the storm. Maybe he is still out there searching for you. If you let me go, I can find him. I can bring him to you. For a moment, the Yuki-onna was silent, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, a sound like the cracking of ice. You think to deceive me, mortal? Do you take me for a fool? Hiroshi's heart pounded in his chest, but he pressed on. No, I swear it. I'll go to the village, find the records of the past, and search for Kenji's descendants. If he is not alive, perhaps they are. Perhaps they know where his spirit rests. The Yuki-onna's gaze bore into him, searching for any hint of deception. Then, slowly she nodded. Very well. But know this, Hiroshi, if you fail me, if you break your promise, I will find you. And when I do, no warmth in this world will save you from my embrace. Hiroshi nodded, feigning gratitude while suppressing the fear that gnawed at him. Thank you, I will not fail. The Yuki-onna stepped back, allowing him to rise. Go then, but remember the cold is always watching. Hiroshi turned and fled the hut, not daring to look back. As he stepped into the snow, the storm had lessened, the path ahead faintly visible in the early dawn light. He forced himself to keep moving, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. He had no intention of searching for Kenji or anyone else. He would leave the mountains, return to the city, and never speak of this encounter again. But as he made his way down the mountain, Hiroshi couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed, that the cold had not entirely released its grip on him. And he knew, deep down, that the Yuki-onna would not forget him, that she would be waiting for the day when the cold would claim him as it had claimed so many before. And somewhere in the mountains, a woman in a white kimono watched as Hiroshi disappeared from sight, a cold smile playing on her lips. The snow fell softly around her, and she knew that her curse was far from broken. But for now, she would let him go, because the cold was patient, and she had all the time in the world. When Hiroshi finally reached his grandmother's house, it was late, and the moonlight cast long shadows across the snow-covered path. He hadn't seen her in years, but the familiarity of the place and the warmth of her embrace should have calmed him. Instead, he trembled with a fear that had burrowed deep into his bones, refusing to let go. His grandmother noticed immediately, her sharp eyes taking in his pallor, the way he avoided her gaze. She didn't ask what had happened, she already knew. You've met her, haven't you? She said quietly, her voice tinged with something like pity, but tempered by pragmatism. Hiroshi nodded, unable to speak. He saw no point in lying. His grandmother always saw right through him. You need to find Kenji's descendants, she continued, her voice firm now, a directive rather than a suggestion. Even if you move to the equator, Yuki-onna will find you. You made a promise, Hiroshi, and she has all the time in the world. The gravity of her words sank in like a stone in water, sending ripples of terror through him. His grandmother's lips pressed into a thin line. Women do not like being lied to, she said, her tone almost stern, especially spectral women. Before he left, she pressed a small talisman into his hand. This should protect you, she said, though the way she held it, like a relic of some old superstition, made Hiroshi skeptical. Still, he pocketed it without protest, more to ease her worry than anything else. Hiroshi spent days combing through records, hoping against hope to find any mention of Kenji and his descendants. He visited the village, questioned the few elders who might remember something, but was met with blank stares and unhelpful shrugs. The most he uncovered were vague hints about where people might have started their journey up the mountain. All those years ago, the trail had gold, and so had Hiroshi's hope. Then one night Giona returned. He'd been dozing off in the small rental home he'd secured, the fire barely keeping the chill at bay, when he felt her presence. She slipped in like the cold itself, her beauty more haunting than before. The room seemed to grow colder, the air denser with something he could only describe as dread. "Have you found anything?" she asked, her voice low and dangerously soft. Hiroshi, in his desperation, lied. "Yes," he said, "I found something." But Yuki-onna's expression didn't change. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were like chips of ice, cold and unyielding. She knew the truth. She always had. Her face twisted just for a moment into something monstrous, something that made Hiroshi's blood run cold. In a panic, he grabbed the talisman from his pocket, thrusting it out in front of him like a shield. Yuki-onna recoiled in fear and anger. The warmth of the talisman stung her, but it was a minor inconvenience, nothing more. "That trinket won't protect you forever," she hissed, her voice like the wind howling through the trees. "When your grandmother's memory fades, so will its power." It dawned on Hiroshi then. The talisman worked not because of some ancient magic, but because of his grandmother's love, her belief in its power, and that was fragile, ephemeral. Yuki-onna's gaze bore into him, a final warning before she vanished into the night. Hiroshi knew he was running out of time. Desperation led him to one final, reckless idea. Maybe Kenji never made it down the mountain. He retraced what little of the couple's journey he could piece together, the old map clutched tightly in his hand. But the landscape had changed. The trails overgrown or lost entirely. He was on the verge of giving up when he stumbled upon a small hut, isolated and almost forgotten. An old man answered the door, introducing himself as Kenji. Hiroshi blinked, trying to make sense of it. Could this be the Kenji Yuki-onna was looking for? It didn't seem possible the Kenji she spoke of lived centuries ago, but there was something in the old man's eyes. Something that told Hiroshi not to dismiss the connection so easily. Kenji invited him inside, sensing Hiroshi's confusion. People don't come this way anymore, Kenji said, pointing to a shrine outside because of the Yuki-onna. He explained that he had built the shrine to ward off spirits, but Hiroshi noticed something else, a small urn placed before a weathered gravestone, the name long eroded by time. When Hiroshi asked about Kenji and Asami, the old man stiffened. "You mean Asami, the Yuki-onna," he said quietly. The name hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Kenji revealed that he was named after his ancestor Kenji, who had died with one final wish to have his ashes laid to rest beside Asami. But fear had kept his family from fulfilling that wish, and the task had fallen to Kenji, who had failed to find where Asami had died. Hiroshi confessed that he knew where Yuki-onna was. The old man's eyes narrowed, and Hiroshi braced himself for the reaction. But instead, Kenji nodded, resigned. Together, they agreed to take Kenji's ancestors' ashes to Yuki-onna, hoping to finally put her spirit. As they approached the cabin where Hiroshi had first encountered Yuki-onna, the air grew colder, the atmosphere thick with something Hiroshi could only describe as foreboding. She was there waiting, her beauty more breathtaking than ever, but her expression twisted with anger. As they approached the cabin where Hiroshi had first encountered Yuki-onna, the air grew colder, the atmosphere thick with something Hiroshi could only describe as foreboding. She was there waiting, her beauty more breathtaking than ever, but her expression twisted with anger. Hiroshi and the old man, Kenji, stood in the cold cabin, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. The light of day was quickly fading, and with it Hiroshi's hope. The shadows grew longer, the temperature turned cold that gnawed at their bones. The two men exchanged a glance, a silent agreement that there was no turning back now. The door creaked open, and the cold breath of the mountain swept in, carrying with it the presence of Yuki-onna. She appeared before them, her form as ethereal as ever, with her long black hair cascading over the delicate white silk of her kimono. Her beauty was mesmerizing, but her eyes, those icy, unforgiving eyes, bore into Hiroshi with a fury that chilled his soul. "You lied to me," she whispered, her voice a dangerous melody that echoed in the small space. "You promised to find him, and yet you bring me nothing but false hope." Hiroshi felt his heart hammering in his chest, fear constricting his throat. But before he could speak, Kenji stepped forward, his face solemn. "Please hear me," the old man began, his voice steady but laced with sorrow. "I am Kenji, named after my ancestor, the man you once loved." Yuki-onna's gaze shifted to Kenji, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, though it was tainted with centuries of pain and anger. Asami Kenji continued, using her mortal name, I have come to tell you what became of the man you waited for, the man you loved so dearly. The mention of her old name seemed to strike a chord within her, and for a moment, the storm of her fury seemed to abate, leaving behind a glimmer of the woman she once was. My ancestor, your Kenji said, did not abandon you out of malice. He loved you, Asami, more than words can express. But on that fateful day when the snows came and the mountain turned treacherous, he believed that if he could find help, he could save you both. Yuki-onna's expression hardened, but she remained silent, listening. He left you thinking he would return with aid, with warmth, with life. But the mountain was unforgiving. It swallowed him in its endless cold, just as it did you. He searched for you, Asami, tirelessly, but the snow had claimed you. When he could not find you, his heart broke. He returned to the village, but he was a shadow of the man he once was. Kenji paused, his eyes filled with the weight of the tale he was recounting. Kenji spent the rest of his days in grief and guilt, tormented by the thought that he had failed you. His love for you consumed him, and he passed away not long after, his heart shattered by the burden of his regret. A silence fell over the cabin, thick and oppressive. Yuki-onna's eyes, once so full of rage, now softened with sorrow and a deep, ancient pain. He searched for me, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kenji nodded. Yes, Asami, he never stopped searching until the day he died. His last wish was to be reunited with you, to have his ashes brought back to this place to rest beside you in peace. A single tear, crystalline and pure, rolled down Yuki-onna's pale cheek. The cold in the room seemed to lessen, if only by a fraction, as she processed the truth she had long been denied. I have waited for so long, she murmured, her voice trembling with the weight of centuries of anguish. I thought he had forgotten me, that he had left me to die alone in the snow. No, Kenji said gently, he never forgot you, Asami. His love for you endured, even beyond death. Yuki-onna's form seemed to waver, as if the very essence of her being was unraveling. The icy wind that had accompanied her entrance now felt like a soft, mournful breeze. I have taken so many lives, she confessed, her voice choked with emotion. I became the very thing I once feared, driven by anger and sorrow. And all this time, he was searching for me. Kenji stepped forward, holding out the small urn containing his ancestors' ashes. It is not too late, he said softly. We can reunite you both as he wished. Let the torment end and find peace together. Yuki-onna looked at the urn, her eyes filled with a profound sadness. Slowly she reached out, her hand trembling, and took the urn from Kenji. As her fingers brushed the cold surface, a sense of calm over her, the centuries of pain and anger finally beginning. Thank you, she whispered, her voice carrying a deep gratitude. Thank you for bringing him back to me. Kenji and Hiroshi watched as Yuki-onna, once the feared spirit of the mountain, now stood as the sorrowful woman she once was. The storm outside began to subside, the howling wind replaced by a gentle snowfall, as if the mountain itself was offering its blessing. Will you help me find peace? Yuki-onna asked, her voice fragile yet hopeful. Yes, Kenji replied. We will lay you to rest together as it was meant to be. And so the legend of Yuki-onna took a different path. No longer did she haunt the mountain with vengeance in her heart. Instead, she became a guardian spirit, guiding lost travelers to safety, her soul finally at peace. And the mountain, once a place of fear, became a place of quiet reverence, where the story of a love that endured even death was whispered among the trees and the snow. As the last echoes of our tale fade into the cold night, we leave the snow-covered mountains behind, but their haunting beauty remains etched in our minds. That Hiroshi's brush with the Yuki-onna is a reminder that some legends are more than just stories. They are warnings, whispered through the ages, carried by the winds that sweep across the silent forests. I hope you felt the chill of this journey, and that it stirred something deep within, a yearning for the unknown, the mysterious and the timeless. If this tale left you breathless, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting to be told, each one a doorway into a world where myth and reality entwine. Until we meet again, I'm Mooncat, bidding you a restful night. But remember, in the silence there may still be whispers from the past. Sleep well and dream deeply.